What is anchoring bias? It's people's tendency to be overly influenced by initially presented information. The first piece of information anchors decision-making. It's why our first impressions or initial pieces of information stick with us and influence our decision-making more than they probably should. Anchoring bias can skew our judgment, whether we're negotiating a price for a new car, describing symptoms to our doctor, or even trying to estimate the height of a towering redwood. Moreover, the anchoring bias can sneak into our thoughts even when the initial information is irrelevant, random, and completely misleading. The anchoring bias comes from our mental difficulty in making sufficient adjustments in decision-making from the initial anchor. The insufficient adjustment is partly because the anchoring information is more active in our minds and more mentally accessible. Here is an example. Two groups of high school students were given a mathematical question. They had only 5 seconds to estimate the answer. One group got this question, while the other got this question. 5 seconds were not long enough for most people to do the math. The student had to guess. The two groups' answers should have been at least roughly the same, but they were not. The first group's median answer was way higher, all because they started with a higher number, the number 8, which served as their anchor. Now, take another group of visitors at the San Francisco Exploratorium who were asked to estimate the height of the tallest redwood tree. Again, the estimates of the groups varied widely. Why? Well, it was all due to the anchor. One group was asked if the height was more or less than 1,200 feet. The other was asked about 150 feet. Can you guess which group estimated higher? In another study, participants were asked to spin roulette wheel and then estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. Their guesses were influenced by the random numbers they spun on the wheel. But here is the key. Experts are as likely to fall for the anchoring bias as non-experts. Think you are immune to the anchoring bias because you are a pro in your field. Well, think again. Even experienced realtors, when asked to appraise the house value, were significantly influenced by the initial list price, which is an anchor. But the irony is, unlike their non-expert counterpart, they denied being influenced by the anchor. A judge's decision can be influenced by something as arbitrary as a roll of the dice. Strikingly, right? In an experiment, even when judges were told that prosecutors' sentencing recommendations, which was the anchoring information, was randomly generated, most judges' judgments were still swayed by the anchoring information, regardless of the fact that they should be firmly rooted in evidence. Judges who received a higher recommendation meted out higher sentences on average than those who received the lower one. The findings goes to show that even experts are not shielded from the anchoring bias. In personal injury cases, the higher the compensation you request, the more likely jurors and judges are to believe in the defendant's culpability and therefore awarding you a higher compensation. In negotiations, the power of the first offer often leaves a potent impression, setting the tone for counteroffer and the ultimate settlement. Some negotiators even deploy phantom anchor, where they put forward an aggressive first offer only to swiftly retract it. For example, a car salesperson says, I was going to ask $8,000 for this beauty, but let's say $6,000. That initial 8,000, even though quickly withdrawn, lodges yourself into your mind, serving as a phantom anchor. Experimental results suggest that the use of phantom anchors has downsides. The perception of manipulation or the risk of causing offense with extreme anchors can sometimes backfire, leading potential partners to walk away from the negotiation table. So how can we use anchors more effectively and ethically? Use multiple equivalent simultaneous offers. By presenting several offers of equal value simultaneously, you can not only create a stronger anchoring effect, but also offer your negotiating partners flexibility to align with their interest. When negotiating over large purchases like cars or houses, have you noticed yourself being swayed by certain compelling reference points, perhaps those enticing round numbers like $10,000? Or maybe you've been attracted to prices just under those round numbers, say $9,998. Take a moment to choose one of the two numbers, $10,000 or $9,998. You see, the mysterious power of the anchoring bias might be at play here. If you find yourself routinely paying prices just below round numbers like $9,998 for a house, there is a chance you may end up losing money when it's time to sell. Researchers studied over 13,000 repeated transactional real estate transactions and came up with an interesting finding. Those buyers who initially paid an amount slightly under $10,000 reference point ended up selling their houses for an average. Those buyers who initially paid an amount slightly under $10,000 reference point ended up selling their houses for an average of $2,000 less than those who paid at or just above the $10,000 mark. And the negotiations did not seem to correct this bias. In a recent study, researchers showed that rudeness does not just hinder performance, it also makes us prone to the anchoring bias. Participants who were exposed to or overheard rude conversations displayed a strong propensity towards the anchoring bias, clinging to initial, often erroneous information. For example, in a simulated surgical scenario, residents who saw a senior physician chastising a colleague were 10 times more likely to stick to an inaccurate diagnosis, even when accurate data were at their disposal. You see, from negotiations to legal sentencing and financial decisions, the anchoring bias has far-reaching impacts on our decisions. How to tame its undesired influence? People with a propensity for perspective-taking or those nudged to consider others' viewpoints are less susceptible to the anchoring bias. Perspective-taking means stepping out of our shoes and trying to understand situation from another person's point of view. For example, in a negotiation, instead of firmly sticking to our initial offer, which is the anchor, we could try to understand the other party's viewpoint, their needs and wants. By doing so, we naturally reduce the impact of our initial anchor and become more open to finding a middle ground. Moreover, focusing on task details and actively seeking additional information can be formidable safeguards against decision errors caused by the anchoring bias. This means meticulously going through all the information and details of the task at hand rather than making decisions based on the initial piece of information alone. As you hire new team members, if a candidate's initial salary expectation is presented at the outset, which is an anchor, it's easy for you to base your hiring decision heavily on that figure alone. However, it's crucial to focus on all task details. Instead of concentrating solely on the salary expectation, you should consider a wide range of factors, including the candidate's skills and experience, personality fit within the team, potential for growth, and their overall contribution to the organization's goals. You should also consider industry standards, budget constraints, and internal pay equity. Third, the importance of maintaining a respectful and civil discourse cannot be overemphasized. Rudeness, as shown in the experiments, amplifies our susceptibility to the anchoring bias. A hostile environment can disrupt our cognitive functions, compelling us to cling to the initial piece of information rather than seeking additional insights or perspectives. Don't be rude.